You people are a bunch of ignorant, low IQ morons that can't understand simple concepts. And because you're not very bright, because you're a little bit special in the head, because you're touched, even though your mommy said you're great, you're not, you're a loser. You really think that the government is lying to you about inflation? Everything is a lie. The inflation rate is not 2.9% year over year. It's not growing slowly. No, inflation is rocketing up in a vertical line. And all you dopes and losers, you go on YouTube, you type in inflation bad, and you get fed a bunch of reinforcement nonsense from a bunch of clowns that don't even understand what's going on. So yes, I'm pushing back against the narrative that inflation is out of control and that the government is lying to you about it. It's all one big conspiracy theory. And I know these videos aren't popular because you want to get fluffed. You want smoke blown up your rectum, and I bet it tickles and it feels so good, doesn't it? Why is inflation not being lied about with the government? Well, let me explain to you how inflation actually works. It is cumulative. It adds on to itself. If you have 10% inflation, let's say you go from $100 to $110, and then you have 10% inflation on that, the base cost of all the items in the aggregate, goods and services, is now 121. And then if you get 10% on that, it grows even greater. So the base cost of the good is stacking up with the inflation rate. And people don't seem to understand that. So, during the pandemic, 2020 lockdown, money got thrown everywhere, free stimmy checks, everybody's a genius, vertical lines in stocks, oh my God. And then because of that, we had supply chain disruptions and a lot of money floating around, and you combine those two together, you're gonna get inflation, okay? And that inflation every year stacks on itself. So over time, people are looking and they're seeing the official government statistics. And they're saying, well, the government is only saying that, inflation is up 2.9% if you annualize it out. And that's complete nonsense because 5 years ago, I could buy a steak for $10 and now steak is $50. Therefore, the government must be lying to me because there's no way that steak is only 2.9% more. Obviously, it's quadrupled in price or quintupled in price. And you're not understanding the cumulative effect of inflation. You've anchored your perception of the cost of items in the past, okay? The government is not lying about inflation. And even if they were lying, they're only lying by a couple micro percentage points, okay? There is no vast conspiracy to hide inflation. And what you're also doing is you're fixating on certain items, certain products that have gotten egregiously more expensive. And what do? You keep buying it because you're stupid. For example, steak, beef. Now, I used to consume beef. I did. And then I noticed when I went to the store after the pandemic that beef was really freaking expensive. And I said, you know what? I'm not paying that. Now, the inflation rate for beef has been astronomical, right? It has. So I stopped eating it, and now I switched to chicken. But the inflation rate for beef is not the inflation rate for the country as a whole, okay? There's items that are actually getting cheaper over time, like TVs. I remember TVs, flat screens used to be freaking pricey. And then I go to Walmart. I mean, I haven't been there. Well, actually, yeah, I went there with my kids a couple days ago. I went to Walmart and I saw this huge TV and it was like $300-400. And I said, what? TVs are that freaking cheap? Laptops seem to be getting cheaper. Games are getting cheaper. You may not believe me, but I remember when N64 games came out and they were $60. And this was when I was in freaking elementary school. They were $60 when I was in elementary school, which was decades ago. And now I can get games for $60. Things are getting cheaper, especially on inflation-adjusted terms, for a lot of items. But you numbskulls just can't seem to grasp the concept that inflation is not just one item. It's a basket of goods in the aggregate. And I'm not even an economist, okay? I'm just a person that uses common sense and logic to, grasp that inflation really isn't that bad anymore. And it's actually true, okay? We had a spike of inflation starting in 2021. And that inflation has stacked on itself. But the fact that the cost of a specific item that you're buying now, as opposed to 5 years ago, is astronomically higher does not mean that the government is lying to you about inflation. And the last thing I'll say, real estate, cars. Everybody's talking about how cars and real estate are getting more expensive. You could still get a sedan for like $20,000. Okay? I remember back in the day, they were like, this is 10 years ago, they were like $16,000, $17,000. They're really not that more expensive. What you morons are doing is you're buying these expensive, fully loaded, gizmoed out freaking trucks. And, oh man, inflation's so bad. And also interest rates have gone up, which makes the payments higher. That's not inflation, okay? That's just monetary policy. That's the rate policy by the Federal Reserve. So the whole point of this video is the government is not lying about inflation, okay? You can have a personal impact on your life when it comes to inflation, and you can make choices in your life to mitigate inflation, okay? If something has become astronomically more expensive, you can probably avoid it. Not in all circumstances, obviously, but you can always avoid it. And you can't sit around and blame inflation and blame the government for lying to you, when in reality, you're misunderstanding what inflation is all about. And if you're actually intelligent and you invested during good times, I invest in good times and bad times. But if you invested during the good times, you'd actually have a decent portfolio that exceeds inflation. That's right. My portfolio, despite all you morons, has beat inflation. The 10-year return to VC compounded is hovering around 10%, okay? I don't want to freaking hear your nonsense. Oh, inflation's over 10%. No, it's not. It's a basket of goods, you morons. So if times are good and inflation is low, instead of blowing all your money, because times are good, perhaps you'd saved a little bit, you'd be beating inflation, no problem. Inflation hasn't really changed my life at all. I've benefited from inflation. My pay goes up with inflation over time. My portfolio goes up with inflation over time. The real cost of my fixed rate debt goes down over time. I love inflation. If you're sitting around and complaining about inflation and blaming the government, you're a freaking loser. Anyway, what do you think? Has this video disturbed you? Please comment below of one specific item that is now way more expensive, and ignore all the other items that are actually cheaper over time to fit your narrative to blame something else for your financial failures. Anyway, like, subscribe, consider joining as a member to support the channel. You get exclusive content and priority responses to comments, and you guys have a wonderful, delicious day.